So our next session will be fully in English. للأسف ما عندناش ترجمة لهي الجلسة. But it's going to be problems in Nakba literary and intellectual discourse. I'm just going to introduce our chair for this session, Maysoon Sukkarieh. She's a reader in the Department of International Development at King's College London. She holds a PhD from UC Berkeley, and part of her research is connected to the knowledge production of refugees in Lebanon. I will let Maysoon introduce the speakers, but today we have Hadi Burhani with us and Sadia Aksus Bainstein. I'm so sorry. But they're going to be discussing various issues in relation to the topic we have today, and I'm really excited to have you both. Welcome. Maysoon, I give you the floor.
Okay, thank you. So like the conference title implies, it's important to emphasize the significance of the Nakba, not merely as a historical context, but an ongoing process that persists to the present day and manifests itself in Israel's continued subjugation of Palestinians through various forms of violence, suppression, and oppression. The Nakba was not a simple matter of stereotypical dispossession and usurpation. It is rather a paradigm of settler colonialism, and this essentially stands as such today. The Nakba's causes, motives, and downstream manifestation are all still operative and impactful. Gaza Strip, that is a witness of the latest Nakba chapter, has turned into one enormous refugee camp with a 365 square kilometer area sheltering 2 million Palestinian refugees from 48 and 67 Palestine. As we witness Gaza today, we have to remember also that the word genocide is so fitting to the Palestinian ongoing Nakba that it could have been specifically designed to denote it since the creation of the State of Israel, since the intent has been the total or partial destruction of a national group, regardless of the number of people killed or removed from an area. Well, since its creation, Israel has been continuously and systematically producing misinformation that denies the reality of the Palestinian 48 Nakba and the ongoing Nakbas, such as the legendary flight of the Palestinian Arabs from their villages they just left, towns and cities at the request of Arab armies following the launch of the 48 war. And before that, of course, that it was a land without people, for a people without a land. The Palestinians, also later the Palestinians as the ones who refused the peace in the 90s, and the lies about the ongoing genocide and Nakba now. The list is so long, but it's like the list of misinformation is so long. And this has led to a production of ignorance about Palestine and the Palestinians in the West that are still circulating now and used as justification for the Israeli genocide. It is thus important to ask questions such as, what keeps ignorance alive or allows it to be used as a political instrument? How we know, and why don't we know what we don't know? Ignorance is often more than just an absence of knowledge. It can also be the outcome of cultural and political struggles. Ignorance has a history and a political geography. It's important to understand how and why various forms of knowing don't come to be, or have disappeared, or have become invisible. Well, to counter this ignorance, there is a wealth of knowledge production from the Palestinian side, and the Institute for Palestine Studies played a major role in countering this misinformation. And this helped much in the current chapter of the Nakba, but there are still questions that need to be asked. How sometimes when we are trying to produce a counter-hegemonic knowledge, we can erase, make invisible, and in other words, make invisible certain things about the Nakba or the Palestinians. In other words, how the Nakba is constructed even by those who are trying to respond to the Israeli mythologies of the ongoing Nakbas. And of course, there are the questions about how can we learn from the counter-hegemonic production of the past to counter the myth of the ongoing genocide that is unfolding in our own eyes. So I'm really looking forward to hear the contribution of this session titled Problems of Nakba, Literary and Intellectual Discourse. I will start with Hadia. With Hadi, okay. With Hadi Burhani, and Hadi holds a PhD from the European Center for Palestine Studies, University of Exeter. He's an assistant professor of Middle East Studies in the Faculty of World Studies, University of Tehran, and author of textbooks on Israel-Palestine, the politics of education and knowledge in the West, Bloomsbury Publishing 2022. Hadi will be presenting on textbook on Israel-Palestine, the politics of education and knowledge in the West. Welcome, Hadi.
Thank you for the chance to be with you. First of all, hi, everyone. So at the beginning, I would like to share my screen. I think, let me see now. Yeah, I have your permission, it seems.
Yeah.
Let me go to the You have my screen now?
No, can you click share screen in the bottom? Is it working?
Yes, I tried. Yeah, let me again share a screen, and then okay.
So when you click the green button, it'll show you different screens.
Yeah.
And there's another button that says share in the bottom right.
First, I should choose my file and then share, okay?
Yeah.
So let me find how I can. I want to show your screen. Open.
Hadi, would you like to send me the file via email? And I can...
Email, yes. Or I think I can send it here from here or not. Or
You can try.
email.
If it is big, it won't allow you to post it on the chat. It's best to email it.
So I go to email now.
Maybe you can start and Laura will post it while you are speaking also, like if you can start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I now I have my email, so I can send it to you now. Right now.
It's Laura Albast.
Yep. I'll send it to you.
Maybe can you start with the second speaker and then I
Okay. Okay.
Sorry.
Yes, I was
Sorry.
going to suggest, but I thought it wasn't. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
we are sorry, and while the technical problem is being fixed, we are going to listen to Sadia, who will be presenting on Nakba and the metaphorical exile in the Palestinian literature in Israel. Sadia Aksus-Beinstein, who is a scholar of Arabic and Hebrew languages, literature, and cultures, and teaches in the Department of Arabic Studies at the Sorbonne Paris-III University. Her research is embedded in cultural and translation studies and modern Arab thought, with a focus on Palestinian culture in Israel, the Palestinian Cultural Archives, and Jewish-Arab relations. We are really looking forward to hear Sadia speaking about the Nakba, metaphorical exile in the Palestinian literature in Israel. Welcome, Sadia.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank the team, the organizers, and Lubna, who was sending me and trying to make sure that I would be here. Anyway, so thank you for organizing and inviting me to this important, I think, conference. When I first applied with my paper, I was thinking of highlighting the Nakba and the notion of exile in Palestinian literature in Israel. I will still address this issue. But my proposal was, like everybody else, was sent before the ongoing genocide in Gaza. As a researcher on Palestinian and Israeli literatures and cultures, it's really difficult to write and think about literature in time of genocide. I'm still wondering about Adorno's post-Shoah comment, writing a poem after Auschwitz is barbaric. Anyway, so so I have studied Palestinian literature and culture of Palestine 48 as part of Arabic, what we call Palestine 48, as part of Arabic and Palestinian literature and culture. It was important for me to understand the Nakba, on how the Nakba was articulated in the literature in Arabic and in the rare novels written in Hebrew, such as those of Anton Shammas or Said Qashor. Actually, the Nakba in these novels in Hebrew tried to face its erasure in Hebrew literature. In a sense, you can talk about 1948 Nakba and as a literary object without talking about the contribution of Palestine 48 and without talking about the Galilee of the 1950s and 60s, which initiated what I call the map of the Palestinian literature. Before getting there, I would like to return to Gaza. Clearly, this genocide will have transformative consequences for the Palestinian literature. In my recent article, which I really had a hard time to write, titled Palestinian Literature Between Aesthetics, Exile, War, and Death, I wrote the following, quote, Palestinian literature as the literature of the refugee, the exile, and the wretch of this earth will certainly bring a new way of writing under the condition of war. Gaza's experiences of genocide shows how human beings can use beauty and aesthetics to convey their condition. The use of social networks to write this literature, even if it's really small, of war requires us in the future to consider how we'll be able to read this post-genocide literature and how we will address it. Despite the horror, Gaza is bringing a revolution in some ways in literature, in the way literature is written and disseminated under the condition of war. It also plays the role of witness and testimony and archives for a period that every human would wish not to remember. So in my paper, I'm interested in the Nakba experience and how Palestinian poets and writers who are in Israel have brought it to life in their literature at a time of isolation and great repression on the part of the state of Israel. I think it's important to underline this literary map of Galilee from which Kanafani built his concept of literature of resistance. More importantly, these writers and the Palestinian 48 need to be recentered within the Palestinian cultural history for it as a fact that they suffered an injustice in general within the Arabic literary sphere. They certainly didn't experience life in the camps of Lebanon, Syria, and other Arab countries, but their exile was internal and metaphorical. As Edward Said mentioned, quote, being inside is a privilege that is a misfortune, similar to the feeling of being trapped in a house your own, end of a quote. We have been experiencing since the time of the formation of nations, the era of exiles, displacement, but also that of migrations. Each exiled person attempts to reconstruct the former life on the new geographical space, including literature, which is articulated at first as a place of memory of the old and the lost territory. Exile is when life loses its bearing. Exile is nomadic. These are words of Edward Said, whose out of place is a reflection on exile. I was interested in the notion of metaphorical exile as a way to understand the literature of those who remain in their homeland. I was thinking about Algeria as a French colony, actually. This is the culture I came from. I'm Algerian, actually, with all its specific aspect, as well as the Palestinian who remained on their land after the Nakba 48. Edward Said's metaphorical notion of exile does not limit it to displacement, but to a condition such as that of intellectuals who are outsiders in their society. In a way, this condition is the source of creativity that challenges the national norms. For Edward Said, quote, exile for the intellectual is the metaphysical sense. This metaphysical sense is a movement constantly being unsettled and unsettling others. In this case, Palestinians in Israel experience both real and metaphorical condition of exile. So this notion of metaphorical exile can be linked to the nomadic notion of Gilles Deleuze, who was known as a great supporter of the Palestinian struggle. Actually, I do think that the Palestinian experience has an impact on the writing of Gilles Deleuze when it comes to territory and other questions. So he says, the nomad is not necessarily someone who moves. There are journeys on the side, journeys in intensity, and even historically nomads are not those who move in the way of migrants. On the contrary, they are those who do not move and who start nomadizing, I don't know if it exists, to remain in the same place, to escape the codes. End of quote. To convey this nomadic notion to the Palestinian Israel is to recognize them as nomad within their own land. They became a minority after being a majority, while being geographically and politically isolated. They mastered the Hebrew language and therefore escaped some identity reference, some codes, including that of the dominant national language and culture. In his poem, Who I Am Without Exile, Mahmoud Darwish uses exile as part of a series of question and answers to highlight this word as an essential element in his poetic space. His exile is almost similar to that of Edward Said or Ghassan Kanafani. Only Darwish, who was born in Beirut and experienced the Nakba 48, returned to spend years in Israel before his other and final exile. In Al-Jadid in 1969, he wrote the following, quote, if I compare being a refugee in exile and a refugee in the country, and I have experienced both, then I consider being a refugee in the country to be more ferocious and brutal. The torture of exile and the expectation of the promised day of return are justified. It is a normal thing. However, being a refugee in your country, nothing justifies it. There is no logic to it. End of quote. As a child, Darwish experienced his first exile in Lebanon, only to return to his homeland like a stranger without returning to his village. He suffered the humiliation of the military regime and witnessed the year of the 67 that marks an endless and permanent occupation. He was born there as a poet. He worked as a communist with both Arab and Jews. He loved Lorca and read the national poet of Israel, Bialik. In his farewell letter to Ghassan Kanafani, Darwish mentioned his birth, not the one in 1941, but the birth of the young poet in Israel. He thanked him for bringing to light the work of this youth from Palestine who hardly reached 30 and who tried as much as they could and despite isolation to write poetry. And this is what he wrote. He said to Kanafani, my friend, I said goodbye to many friends, but it was only when I said goodbye to you for the last time that I gave up a period of my life. I was born before that, but it was you who announced my birth. I didn't thank you. I thought we'd live longer. End of quote. It is a very powerful statement from Darwish, thanking the one who brought to light these Palestinians of 48. Let me here briefly talk about 5 literary experiences of these Palestinians in Israel. The exilic representation is very symbolic in Ilyas Khouri's novel, The Children of the Ghetto, My Name is Adam. Khouri placed the memory of the displacement, death, and survival of Palestinians in Israel in Arabic literature. Adam, the main character, is the symbol of this minority. The most explicit poetic reference in Khouri's novel is the Palestinian poet Rashid Hussein. By deciding as soon as the introduction to make Adam Danoun die in the fire in his apartment in New York, Khouri used fiction to tell and to imagine the 2 exiles of Rashid Hussein. Born in 1938 in Musmus, Palestine, Hussein was a poet and a translator between Arabic and Hebrew. He was one of the key elements in rebuilding the Arab-Palestinian culture in Israel after the Nakba. Mastering Hebrew, he was a translator from Hebrew into Arabic. He was close to some Israeli Jewish intellectual circles. In 1958, he tried to bring together Israeli and Palestinian writers and poets, and it failed. This failure is clear in his poem, The Locked Door, and he says, "You ask me to describe the beauty of the kibbutz and the moshav and the negev and the yarkon that drops its sense as a groan, but you have forgotten, my brother, that you have locked me out." It is through poetry written by Hussein and order that the resistance of the memory of the Nakba by Palestine have taken root in literature. Kanafani understood that quite early. So Kanafani essays on Palestinian literature in Israel, what he called Adab al-Muqawama, literature of resistance, brings to light names and works of young writers such as Tawfiq Zayyad, Samih al-Qasim, young at that time, of course, Naif Salim, Mahmoud Darwish, and Salam Jubran, and breaks their isolation and introduce them to the Arab reader. And this is what he wrote. He said, contrary to the poetry of exile, the poetry of resistance emerged with an astonishing revolutionary spirit, completely free from the sad and tearful trend. Strangely enough, it's quickly reverberated with all the political upheavals of the Arab countries. Resistance poetry did not only witness a change in purport and poetic effect, but also in form and technique. It rejected the traditional poetic forms and adopted modern techniques without losing force. As the resistance poetry resorted to various mediums of expression, love, satire, and defiance and challenges, end of quotes. This diwan of resistance, as Furani refers to it, has echoes in Lebanon, which was already home to many Palestinian refugees. Kanafani writing was certainly intended to highlight an Arab culture that have survived in Israel despite its isolation, but his interest in this literature did not end there. He also considered the existence of this culture of resistance as the foundation of a new national Palestinian literature, intended to become a focal point of a geographically fragmented Palestinian entity. In this sense, for Kanafani at the time, only Palestinians in Israel of 48 could grant authority to such a literature, since they embodied the preservation of a form of a link with the historical space, while the masses of refugees were still seeking stability between brackets in their new locations. Besides Elias Khouri's reference to the Awlad al-Ghetto, to both Palestinian and Israeli literature, actually in this novel, he talks also about Israeli literature. The later had included Anton Shamas' name on the first page as a way to honor him, to unveil the forgotten story of a minority, and finally to position Anton Shamas in Arabic literature, knowing that he wrote only one novel and it was in Hebrew. Arabesque or Arabiskot in Hebrew carries us through various spaces in which a Palestinian, Anton Shamas, wanders in search of time, identity, and other elements of life. However, there is a story in Arabic in which Shamas describes shortly the Great Arab Revolt in the 30s, and most importantly, he described the fall of the northern Galilee and the survival of the inhabitant of his village, Fasuta, in October 1948, in this military operation named Khiram, during which the inhabitant of Tarshiha fled and other villages were destroyed. Shamas used the same strategy as Emil Habibi to narrate the birth of the Palestinian minority group in Israel. He engaged in his novel a strategy in the field of literature in order to substitute to the field of history, which has neglected the trauma of 48 of the Palestinians in Israel. This is a task which was taken by heart by Salman Natour to mark the collective memory, and he wrote the following. We have our collective memory, and it is the memory of the space and history. This is the most important issue in Palestinian narration, because we are witness to what is happening to the place whose inhabitants have been kept away and whose yearn to return in the future. The place is in a state of erosion and the space is narrowing. So much is changing and disappearing day after day before our eyes. So who documents this memory other than us? the one who is away or the one who remains. We may fail to stop the erosion of the place despite all our effort, but can we afford not to document our memory? Salman Natour placed Palestinian historical memory at the center of the Arab novel to become the writer of the memory. His novel, Dhakira, Memories, for instance, is a literary narrative based on a long investigation carried out by himself among Palestinians in Israel, the work he did in the 80s to collect the memories of the Nakba. In Dhakira, Natour conveys the voices of the Palestinian of Israel through the narrator named a sheikh, whose wrinkles reflect the cartography of the ancient Palestine. The novel provides us a wealth of knowledge about names of destroyed villages and the expelled families. There is, for instance, even a reference to the descendant of the Algerian Emir Abdel Qadir, who settled near Haifa. This memory recurs with the new generation represented here by Ibtisam Azam. Her novel, The Book of the Disappearance, Sif al-Ikhtifa, takes place in Jaffa, more precisely in Ashami. The Israeli wake up one morning to discover that all Palestinians have disappeared. But by allowing space for memory, identity, and otherness, this writer succeeded two characters, Allah, a Palestinian who entered an imaginary dialogue with his grandmother, Huda, and Ariel, the Jewish neighbor, who was very upset by this disappearance. During the imaginary exchange written in his diary, Allah remarked, quote, "When we used to go to school trips to the Galilee or any other place, I used to wonder, was I walking over the corpses of those who have passed through and who were disseminated? Was I walking over the land that was made of decomposed bodies? When I walk in Palestine, I feel I'm walking on corpses. Those images of multitudes of people living in terror are always on my mind. All my grandparents have died, except for you. Do we breathe in these decomposed corpses? What are we going to do with all this sorrow? How can we start anew? What will you do with Palestine?" End of quote. So the question then, what to do with this Palestine? A challenging question to which Riyad Baidas has chosen to address it in a register that questioned the author's generic choice between realism and dystopia. When we see today what's going on in Gaza, it's not dystopia anymore. His collection of short stories, Al-Mahu, the erasure, is another symbol of this symbolic exile of the writer who comes out of the Galilee to reach another Palestinian symbol, East Jerusalem. Al-Mahu for Baidas is the symbol of his inner exile that he links to this process of erasure that began in Galilee and which is continuing in Jerusalem, and I would add today in Gaza. So this literature, with its rich generic form, centralizes specific subjects such as the Nakba, the survival of a minority within the hegemonic Hebrew culture, Palestine, and finally the relationship to the land. Their metaphorical exile represents all these elements. By trying to discuss the Nakba in the Palestinian literature in Israel, I'm trying to think and raise the question, what is a Nakba literature? The answer is complex, I would say, and I believe that the door can be left open to elements to contribute to this debate: the identity of the writer, the languages, and the space from which one writes. For instance, should we consider Ilyas Khoury, who wrote a lot about Nakba and the Palestinian, as being part of the Palestinian literature? I will finish now because I was trying to fit the time, but allow me to quote a poem by Taha Muhammad Ali, the poet of Safuriye, where he describes his exile as an endless migration. So in the fourth Qasida, we travel with Amira, but the meaning of the poet exile is hard to ignore. By the way, this poem was translated by Anton Chemin. So I'll read it. When our loved ones leave, Amira, as you left, an endless migration in us begins, and a certain sense takes hold in us that all what is finest in and around us, except for the sadness, is going away, departing not to return. The pomegranate trees, whose flowers you loved, dropped and the shades withdraw, and the path, and the china bark tree, and the brooks, all departed after you left and won't return. أميرة، عندما يرحل أحباؤنا كما رحلت، تبدأ في داخلنا هجرة لا تنتهي. شكرا. Thank you. The microphone.
Thank you very much, Sadia. That was really great. And it's like made one thinks about the ongoing production of exiles, whether metaphorical or real, by the state of Israel since its inception. But also it's really interesting to hear how this production of exiles by Israel also have is represented in the literature, and how despite all these exiles and refugees and so on, there is still something that joins all the Palestinian in their diaspora and wherever they are. Thank you very much. And now we come to the second. I really look forward to the question and answer with you. There is so much to be said. We'll come now to our next speaker. I'm going to introduce him again for those of you who joined us now. We have Sayed Hadi Burhani, who holds a PhD from the European Center for Palestine Studies at the University of Exeter. He's an assistant professor for Middle East Studies in the Faculty of World Studies, University of Tehran, and he's the author of textbooks on Israel, Palestine, the Politics of Education and Knowledge in the West, which was published by Bloomsbury in 2022. And I think Hadi is going to present the finding from his book. And we really look forward for your presentation, Hadi. Thank you.
Thank you, Maysoon. So I see that my presentation is here. So I can change pages or...
No, just tell me next and I'll go next.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. So yes, this is in fact the next page, please. This is my book that is published by Bloomsbury Academic Publishing, and is in fact come from my PhD dissertation in University of Exeter. And as you can see, the title is Textbook on Israel Palestine. Next, please. Next to the main question. So the main question in this, in fact, research is, how do Western college level textbooks treat the history of the Israel-Palestine question? And this is the first part of the question, and the second part, and why they do treat the question in that specific way. Next, please. So you can here see the main analytical operation of this research. In fact, there are two main analytical operations, two analyses. The first one is a textbook analysis. The method used is historical narrative analysis. And the main target of this analysis, or the main matters subject of this analysis, are 6 history textbooks. Later, I explained about this, of course. And the second analysis is context analysis, and the method used is historian background, and 8 historians of background are analyzed in this phase, of course. Next, please. So, as you can see, I tried in this research to analyze the Western academic knowledge and how this knowledge, academic knowledge in the West, report the history of Israel-Palestine question. So at the beginning, I need to have a segment of knowledge that can represent the Western knowledge in this issue. So for this, in fact, purpose, I extracted online syllabi from Western universities from 6 countries in the West: United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Ireland, Australia, and New Zealand. And all I extracted about 500 online syllabi, and I analyzed these syllabi to specifically reading list of these syllabi to find which textbooks are adopted more in Western university to teach history of Israel-Palestine question. Next, please. So I came, after this survey, I came to a result that 6 textbooks are popular more than others, or adopted more than others in Western universities. So you can see a list of these 6 textbooks. So I analyzed, next please, these textbooks that you can see front page of these textbooks. I don't read the title, you can see. Next, please. So the first analysis that I had, it was, as I said, a textbooks analysis. And this analysis was about how history of Israel-Palestine is reported in these textbooks. So to find how this report is, and the goal was to find how this report of history is related to Zionist report of history. I mean Zionist historiography. So in this stage, I needed to demonstrate that what is the Zionist historiography of Israel-Palestine question and its main elements. Yeah, next, please. So here you can see the main element of Zionist historiography that briefly I read these main elements, that this history, Zionist history of Israel-Palestine question, it has a certain beginning where the history of land starts with Jews' presence in the land, ignoring others who possessed the land before them or alongside their presence. This was the first element. The second element is the supposed Jewish time of possession of the land, that of ancient Israel, is constructed as the principal history of the land. It is narrated also in a way to provide the essentials of a perceived Jewish state, such as Jewish people, Jewish kingdom, and Jewish independence. The next element is this glorious Jewish time has a certain ending, the forced mass expulsion of the Jews from the land by the Romans, and is articulated as the ending of the Jewish state. And the next element is, in fact, it undermines any major Jewish collective experience in other lands except those that function as a reminder of Jewish displacement. And the last one is the main bulk of the land's history, the last 2,000 years that constitute the most documented history of the land, is not taken as a significant period in its history. The main history of this time, according to the Zionist historiography, is located outside Palestine, where Jews lived, who supposedly regarded Palestine as their homeland. Their history is summarized simply as their effort to keep the link with the motherland, their hope to return to it, and their striving to analyze that hope. So I came to the conclusion that these are the main elements of the Zionist historiography. And in this way, in fact, the Zionist history constructs a story of the land that accordingly, the land's history is structured in a way that starts with the Jews and ends with them and leaves no space in between in the land's thousands of years of history that might be filled by others' history. This structure secures a history-long Jewishness of the land, providing a safe historiographical place for the Jews where they are not bothered by others' presence, history, and rights. So next, please. In this figure, you can see a summary of this story, of this history, that there was a Jewish state and then forced expulsion of the Jews happened from the land, and then there was redemptionist effort to come back to the motherland, and then all of them failed, but Zionism was successful to bring the Jews, to return the Jews again to the Jewish state in Palestine. So next, please. So you can see, in fact, this Zionist narrative in main Zionist documents of the question, including in Israel Declaration of Independence, that I have a paragraph here that you can see all these elements is here. Next, please. So the first analysis, in fact, as you can see here in this table, is that all textbooks that I have analyzed to find the main, how they treat the main element of Zionist historiography. So, for example, the history of the land starts with Jews or others. This is one element. The second, how they treat ancient Israel. The second. The third is how Jews disappeared in Palestine. The next one is Jewish redemptionist effort to return, how they treat this element. And then their position on Jewish ethnos, and next, Arab history of the land, how they treat history, Arab history of the land. And then the last one is Jewish polity in other lands. So you can see that I put question mark and I try to provide an answer to these question. Next, please. So here you can see in this table the results that I received, or the answers that I have provided to those questions after the textbook analysis. For example, I read only the first column, history of the land, starts with in the first textbook that you can see in this table on the left side, Palestine and the Arab-Israeli conflict is the title of textbook. This, for example, is use the history of the land with Canaanites. But others you can see in the column, other textbook, they start with Jews. So I don't go to other columns, but so you can see later. But I provide, of course, the main conclusion of this analysis later. So the result of this first analysis, that all analyzed textbook have more or less a pro-Israeli structure. And so Palestine and Arab-Israeli conflict, a textbook, as the only textbook that entertain considerable reservation about some main elements of the Zionist historiography. This is one result. The second, two textbooks, those written by Sachar and Morris, reproduce all the main elements of the Zionist historiography without distancing themselves from them. And the third one is the other two, of course, textbook managed to show some distance between their own position and that of pro-Israeli narrative in some cases. None of the textbook viewed the pro-Israeli structure of the dominant history of the question as a real problem to understanding the Israel-Palestine question. So, I have 4 arguments to support this conclusion, but because of the time, I think it's better to go to the next one. And that is, I argue one argument to support the conclusion is, as you can see in this table C.1, that in these textbooks, theories about the history of the question are presented as established facts. So you can see here in the list of textbook title, for example, the first column, Ancient Israel is, you can see the first textbook provide the history of the ancient Israel as a theory, not as an established fact. But as you can see, all others provide it as a fact. So they don't distance it from this, in fact, theory. So again, I have others, but I go to the next one, the second analysis. The second analysis is a background analysis and investigate about author's background in relation to Israel-Palestine question. So 6 selected textbook has 8 authors, and all, of course, prominent historian of the field that you can see their names here, these 8 historians. And so I analyzed in this stage their background to see, to analyze this background in relation to Israel-Palestine question, to investigate that their background allow them to produce a non-biased knowledge about the question or not. So you can see here that I listed all those 8 historians on the left. And then you can see their nationality, their religion, where they completed their higher education, the language they can understand and access, and their ideology. I mean by ideology, how they are related to Israel-Palestine question. So, for example, the first author, historian you can see here is Bickerton. The nationality is Australian, the religion is Christian, and higher education is completed in Australia and United States. And he has, it seems, no Arabic and no Hebrew. And he had a teaching background in Israel. So in this way, I analyzed all 8 historians, and you can see their, of course, background. And I show you the next page, the result of this, in fact, analysis. So after this second analysis, I came to the conclusion that the main factor for the bias identified in these textbooks are Jewish pro-Israeli historians. Why? And also, another factor is Israeli American national and educational environment of where textbooks are produced. So let me come back to the table, the previous page. So you can see here that from these 8 historians, 6 of them are Jews, 2 of them are Christians. So no Muslim or Arab is in this list. is the list of the main producer of Western knowledge in Western academia. So nationality, most of them American and Israeli. Higher education are mostly conducted in the United States, and the language, they mainly know Hebrew. For example, some of them, like Tesla and Charles Smith, have some Arabics. And in relation to their ideology, I ranked 5 of them as pro-Israeli, and others with some other 3 with some links to Israel. So next, please. So I said no contribution but Palestinian or Arabs or Muslim in that production of knowledge, and no contribution even by other Western nations that are less pro-Israeli nation. I mean, not Americans, British, France, Swedish, I mean that nations also have no contribution in that knowledge produced. So the conclusion is, so I have in this page the main question and the answer. So the first question was, how do Western college level textbook treat the history of Israel-Palestine question? And the analysis, I used textbook analysis. The answer to this question is the textbook knowledge on the Israeli is mainly pro-Israeli in bias. And the second part of the question, why do they treat the question in that way? Their answer is 2 answers. First, Jewish pro-Israeli producer, and the second is American Israeli environment of the textbook production. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much for 2 very interesting presentations that I will try to make them talk to each other a bit. And for the audience, if you have any question, please can you ask by writing on the chat, and I will read the questions for our speakers. So, we got our 3rd speaker. Great. Yay. Hi, Bridge.
Hello.
Yeah, okay, great. So before, great. Thank you. We were missing our 3rd speaker, and here she is. So we are going to move to our to Bridge McQuaid, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Bridge is a PhD student in the Department of History at University of California at Berkeley. And she is she's specializing in the history of modern Palestine. Her project explores the history of the Nakba through the prism of the Mediterranean Sea, Fish and Fishing. Her dissertation titled "The Sea and Its Fish, the Ongoing Nakba," approaches the sea as both method and subject. Bridge holds an MA in Environmental History from the University of Chicago and a BA in Global Studies from UC Santa Barbara. So Bridge is going to present a paper titled "Mapping Palestinian Analysis of the Nakba." Right, so welcome, Bridge, and I will give you the floor.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you all. I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm sorry I messed up the times. Okay, yeah, thank you so much. So my paper, like she just said, is titled "Mapping Palestinian Analysis of the Nakba." My question that I'm thinking about in this paper is, how did scholars and thinkers shape knowledge on the Nakba in the first 2 decades after 1948? So The Nakba marked not only this displacement of the vast majority of Palestinians, totaling over 700 to 800,000 individuals, rendering them stateless refugees, it also signified the transition for the 150,000 Palestinians who remained within the newly established borders of Israel into a status of second-class citizen strangers, subjected to military rule across 80% of what is now called Israel. My paper surveys different journals, including the Journal of Palestine Studies, Middle East Journal, Middle Eastern Studies, Foreign Affairs, and Social Texts from 1947 until 1979. This paper explores how scholars and thinkers shaped knowledge on the Nakba in English. So thinkers including Constantine Zurich, Musa Alami, Walid Khalidi, Elias Shufani, Bernard Lewis, Sabri Jurius, Nafez Abdullah Nazal, Rosemary Said, and Edward Said laid the groundwork for knowledge production. These works of Palestinian, Arab, and British thinkers guide us to future avenues of research and understandings of the Nakba. Following these scholars and thinkers and how they narrated time, history, borders, memory, religion, and everyday practices, this paper offers an initial map of thought on the Nakba. The first thinker, so in chronological order, the first thinker, Constantine Zurich, he was writing after the majority of Palestinians had become refugees following Israel's establishment. He was the one that coined the term Nakba to the catastrophe that had befallen his people. And in his 1948 work, The Meaning of Disaster, he condemned Zionism as a form of imperialist expansion, highlighting its aim to replace one people with another. He criticizes the Balfour Declaration and subsequent UN partition, arguing that they violated Palestinian sovereignty and, quote, natural rights. Moving beyond this lens of the nation state, he framed the struggle against Zionism as a broader fight for human rights, a struggle between, quote, right and might, and between, quote, principle and interest. He urged analysis that would transcend nation state borders and religion, emphasizing a joint and constant struggle for liberation. The next thinker is Musa Alami. His 1949 work viewed the Nakba as a preventable disaster with instructive lenses for the future. He places blame on the British and US Russian support for fostering the catastrophe, citing their training of Zionist forces during the Arab Revolt of 1936 to 39. Alami traced Zionist settler colonialism to military actions in the 1920s with Jablonski's and the revisionist attack on Palestinians in Jerusalem in the 1920 uprising. So he's looking at the Nakba, the ongoing Nakba before 47, and although this doesn't go as early as 1891 or even before that, he does look at offenses before 47 that played a role in the catastrophe that we know as 47-48 and ongoing. He identified two phases in the battle for Palestine. Alami said in the first phase, November 47 to May 5th, 48, the burden of defense was thrown on the shoulders of Palestinians. And in the second, from May 8th, 1948, it was taken up by the Arab armies. In both phases, Alami writes, it was the Arabs that failed to defend Palestine in the military and political spheres. Alami asserted that the main causes include the, quote, lack of unity and dissension among the Arabs and the, quote, existing regimes in the Arab countries and the state of the Arab people. He advocated for Arab nationalism and unity, amongst other things. He also warned of the grave danger of Zionists' expansionist agenda and reiterated the constant struggle for freedom and the important lessons this struggle has. Despite possible limitations in his nationalist approach, Alami underscored the significance of freedom, emphasizing, quote, the people's first duty is to know their rights, to believe in them, and to act by them. Walid Khalidi, the next thinker I thought with, a pioneer of 1948 historiography, laid the groundwork for understanding the Nakba as early as 1959 through his contributions to the Journal for Palestine Studies. In his three-part series, originally published in the Middle East Forum and then later published in JPS, he challenged the traditional Zionist narrative regarding the origins of the Arab refugee problem and exposed the propaganda tactics behind it. His first piece, Plandalet, reveals Zionist military strategies aimed at establishing Israel through the destruction and expulsion of Palestinian communities. In his second piece, he debunks the Zionist myth that claims Arab leaders ordered Palestinians to leave. And in his third piece of the three-part series, Khalidi exposed the conquest of Haifa within the border context of Zionist offenses known as Plan Dalet. It is here that he reveals Anglo-Zionist collusion and the use of terror tactics by the Haganah, which is what would become the IOF or IDF. The next thinker, Elias Shufani, he adds his memories to Khalidi's deep archival dive to expand our understanding of Zionist occupation of Palestine, including the fall of his village in his 1972 piece entitled just that, The Fall of a Village. Shufani, a significant figure in Palestinian resilience and leadership, hailed from Galilee and spent most of his life in exile, shedding light on the Palestinian struggle, or part of it. In his 1972 article, he recounted the resistance against the Haganah, emphasizing the transformation of internal village dynamics in the face of Zionist occupation. He talks about in this piece how everyone was fighting the Haganah and the common enemy in what Shufani called a people's war. Villagers, regardless of social status, collaborated to secure food supplies, fostering a sense of mutual aid and responsibility. Shufani highlighted how the absence of the British Mandate Authority actually led to increased security and cooperation among villagers. Despite limited political education as we know it, their acute awareness of survival strategies embodied resistance, resilience, and communal strength. Here, he challenges conventional political discourse, emphasizing the significance of grassroots resistance and community cohesion in shaping decolonial imaginations. The next person starkly juxtaposed to the post-colonial knowledge production like Shufani is Bernard Lewis, a committed Zionist who produced knowledge steeped in deepening projects of colonial domination and upholding hierarchies of power. I still wanted to include briefly one of his pieces in this talk and in this paper, because I do think it highlights following Shufani, because it really highlights how they are starkly opposed to each other. In the aftermath of the 1967 Six-Day War, Lewis examined the repercussions of what he would call the consequences of defeat. He argued that since 1967, the vocabulary of Middle Eastern politics has included the notion of, quote, the removal of the consequences of aggression, wherein Israel is seen as the aggressor, leading to the dispossession and occupation of Palestinian lands. Lewis asserted that war and defeat act as catalysts for social and political change. He compared the 1967 Naksa, or setback, to the 1948 Nakba, or disaster or catastrophe, noting a shift in discourse surrounding these events. Lewis critiqued the use of the term Naksa, arguing that its universal adoption reflects the nationalization of language and its use to control thought and conceal reality. And what he's really talking about is he's like critiquing the production of knowledge. And if my goal is to understand the production of knowledge, I thought it was interesting how he's like demonizing the words that I think are so important in understanding this ongoing struggle. So then the next thinker, Sabri Juris, born in Palestine in 1938, experienced the dispossession of his home during the 1948 Zionist invasion, profoundly shaping his consciousness. Against the backdrop of settler colonialism and its resistance, he wrote the 1973 piece about Israel's juridical framework for expropriating Palestinian lands through 6 laws and a failed 7th. The laws empowered Israeli or Zionist authorities to evoke language of security, zones, cultivation, emergency, official, transfer, compensation, settlement, development, all words that we hear today in the Zionist expansion, as well as around the globe in terms of settler colonial projects. These words followed their laws, which facilitated forced confiscation, expulsion, and expropriation of Palestinians, their lands, and their homes. However, opposition to these laws existed among Jewish Israeli Zionists, as highlighted by one Hebrew language newspaper and a dialogue with a man and his daughter. And in this dialogue, he says this man is telling his daughter how, like discussing the disregard for Palestinian rights embedded in the legal framework, emphasizing the blame placed on Palestinians by Israeli authorities. So this just paints the picture that it's not a homogenous, no group is has a homogenous approach. Julius underscored that these laws, the sixth and the failed seventh, represent only the beginning of the ongoing problem. So as he focused on the law to understand 1948 and its aftermath, scholar and thinker Nazal drew on oral histories of Palestinian villagers, mainly farmers, who participated in the defense of their villages. And his 1974 piece entitled The Zionist Occupation of Western Galilee, 1948, is based on interviews with 20 families and examines the experiences of inhabitants of 6 villages. Al-Bira, the sixth and final village examined by him, like the other villages, was not prepared for a Zionist attack. When armored cars of over 100 Zionist militants approached on July 10th, most residents fled to neighboring villages. Interviewed at Shatila refugee camp in Lebanon in 1973, a farmer named Haj Ali Fayad recalled his hope of returning with Arab Liberation Army assistance. After waiting for 13 days, villagers decided to reclaim their village to salvage the harvest. However, for a second time, the people of the village Al-Bira were instructed to leave their village, and that evening the village fell to the enemy. In 1950, the Israeli authorities declared Al-Bira, quote, a closed area, which we saw in the previous piece focused on law, and it was a closed area for, quote, security reasons. When Haj al-Fayed returned to visit Al-Bira, he found that his home had suffered the same fate as that of countless other villages in Palestine. Al-Bira was demolished and replaced with a new Zionist village. The next piece is by Rosemary Saeed, and she wrote Palestinians from Peasants to Revolutionaries, A People's History in 1979. This book delved into the ongoing Nakba's impact through intimate oral histories of Palestinians. By prioritizing interviews with ordinary Palestinian, quote unquote, ordinary everyday Palestinians, particularly camp residents in Lebanon, she presented a people's history rather than a, quote, official history. She argued that Palestinian resistance is sustained by peasant culture and cohesion, tracing their transition from peasants to refugees post-1948, and later to militants and revolutionaries after 1967. Her exploration underscores the resilience of Palestinian identity despite displacement, challenging biased official narratives and emphasizing the politicization of attachment to the land. She underscored the power of folk history to facilitate group memory. This focus on ordinary people, what Nazal and Saeed also did in brilliant and different ways, urges us to look more intimately at land and food and farming practices, and to look at the natural environment and its multi-species as both method and subject. The act of producing knowledge can either empower or silence, shedding light on oppression or perpetuating it. Edward Said emphasized that truthfully documenting the events of 1948 is not merely an academic exercise, but a moral imperative for justice and redemption. Long before Benny Morris, Said dismantled the ongoing debate on design versus circumstance by pointing out that the Nakba was not, quote, a fact of nature. Said debunked the Zionist myths that Palestinians fled by Arab leaders' orders, clearly illustrating Zionism's epistemological achievement of erasure. However, denial and silence about the Nakba have dominated discourse, perpetuating Zionist myths. In such, the contested terrain of knowledge production has revealed the centrality and fragility of claims to moral superiority that continue to anchor Israeli power. But it too can reveal the early works of the thinkers that I talked about today. These pioneering Palestinian scholars, as both historical subjects and narrators of the ongoing Nakba, have shaped our understanding of Palestinian history, catastrophe, and identity. And in despite and through that loss, they have shaped the language of our present. Their collective works serve as a comprehensive map to a Palestinian analysis of the Nakba. They offer not just a graphical map, but a rich and expansive tapestry of narratives that transcends borders and embraces the colorful complexity of Palestinian experiences. It is imperative to engage with their early contributions, which complicate the narratives of dispossession and affirm the acts of resilience, hope, and liberation. Through their meticulous archival research and courageous storytelling, they demonstrate a steadfast commitment to preserving Palestinian memory and advancing the ongoing struggle for liberation. Exploring the environment's role in the Nakba's histories offers a fresh perspective on this ongoing narrative. Elias Shufani's insights into survival tactics like camouflage and collective harvesting, Rosemary Sykes' emphasis on listening to ordinary people and group memory provide valuable lessons in resilience and survivance. Thinking with multi-species, the sea and the land as both method and subject offer hope to shed light on how catastrophe is shaped and how we imagine future worlds. Thank you. And that was my dog, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. And it was a comprehensive overview of some of the main intellectuals of debunking so many of the mythologies of the Nakba that was created by the State of Israel and still reproduced to our days, as Syed have told us. You missed him. Okay, thank you. Thank you all for a great presentation. For those who are with us, if you have any question, please type your question on the chat and we can read it. You can suggest who your question is addressed to, or you can, type a question that anyone would like to answer. So just to brief, although it seems hard to connect these three lectures together, but there was a common theme for the three of them, which is the erasure, the denial of existence, and in a way that it was geographic, its history, its geographies, histories, and identities of knowledge producer were always in these presentations. Also, there is a knowledge production by the West and how knowledge is passed on to students with a presentation of Hani, and we have also the other counter-narrative by Bridge. And I think Sadia's presentation talks a lot about these ones, but one can say how it is in the realm of the literature that so much of the resistance to this narrative happened. And perhaps maybe we should ask Sadia and how literature has helped overcome some of the problems of knowledge production of the Palestinians, and how it is taught in universities. So if there are no questions, I think I would like to start with one, which is there were all these issues of identities going on in your three lectures. Like when you said about Elias Khouri, and you are not sure if you can talk about him as a representative of Nakba literature. Hani spoke a lot about identities of the right authors of the texts, and of course, Bridge focused on basically the counter narrative. So I think I want to ask Hani about what is the role of political economy in all what you are saying, because we are talking about knowledge production, and you made it you basically talked about ideologies of the author, but what about the political economy of the knowledge production in terms of the money, the publishing houses, the funders, and what is going on with that? And also I would like to ask you, how do you think in the ongoing war, these things have changed, because there is, I felt when you were talking that this was like a bit like in 2010 maybe and before, but now there is so much more in the syllabus about assignments by authors that Bridge talked about, and many other ones, and also in the realm of literature with Sadia's presentation. So can you tell us a little bit, how do you think this has changed, if you have any idea? And what do you think is the role of the political economy of knowledge production, and not only the ideology and the identities of the authors of the text?
You are asking Mason, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. Hadi. Yeah. my
Hadi,
name
yes,
is
okay.
Hadi. Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you. Welcome. In fact, in my research of the question, I haven't dealt with political economy of the question. So of course, this aspect is very important, in particular in the United States, that we know from other pieces of research that the Jewish lobby in general have a very good access to economic resources, to mass media, to publishers, and they support, of course, their cause from this perspective. In fact, when I analyzed the produced knowledge, I mean the 6 textbooks, most adopted textbook in Western University, I only focused on historians, on authors, as the main factor contributed in producing that knowledge. So this is, of course, from one specific perspective and only cover one aspect of the question. So when I analyzed, as I mentioned, I realized that most of them are pro-Israeli Jews. Yeah, in fact, in the first investigation, I came to the conclusion that 5 from 8 of authors are Jews. And later I sent an email to all those historians, authors, and said that I have produced this knowledge, this thesis, this dissertation, and I would like to convert this piece of thesis to a book. So if you have any consideration or comment, please let me have, or correct me if I had I made any mistake. In fact, one author, Mark Tesler, who wrote Palestine, History of Israel-Palestine question, he said, I am a Jew also. So in the first version, I considered him a Christian. So in this way, I realized later that 8 of them are Jews, from 6 from 8. And 5 of them, all Jews except Mark Tesler, that his position is somehow balanced. All others are pro-Israeli Jews, and they are very clear to reference to their position in their books, in their interview. They clearly support Israel and Zionist ideology. So this is the first answer to first part of your question. But the second part about recent development in US University, of course, I don't have the analysis or report that inform me about the recent development, but I expect that this situation should change something in the US academic area. So the things that we can see now, movement of students, remark by teachers and professors and association of academic. When I conducted my analysis, it was very hard to see developments that we can see now in US university. It was very hard. So I think now we see a new situation in US, especially university in Western universities, and they, I think, should make a transformation in this production and make area for producing pro-Israeli knowledge make harder. This is my answer.
Thank you very much. There is
Welcome.
nothing right or wrong. I'm not saying there was anything wrong with, I'm just like trying to ask a question if you looked at the political economy. I think I have a question for Stadia too, which is also like, you know, so since we are talking about erasure, about denial, and it seems that it was like in the realm of literature way before the historians started to debunk the mythologies of the Israelis or Zionists about the Nakba. It was in the realm of the literature that this debunking was taking place, because they started way before the historians started to talk about even this, right? And so I would like you to talk a little bit about this, and why do you think is the case? Is that, like, you know, why did the novelists and poets and so on took lead in that? This is one. And two, is it okay to flesh out the differences between the metaphorical exiles and exiles? Because many of the ones the people you talk about, the authors you talk about, are also refugees themselves, right? So there is exile, metaphorical exiles, and how does that pin out in that production about Palestine, and geographically how? I am really interested in your take about the revolution of the literature in Gaza now, and I'm not sure if it is about exile or how it will be, you know, after the war. But if you can tell us a little bit about this, it will be great, and how it will help the knowledge production. Maybe you can talk about like literature as the realm of resistance, something like this. Thank you. Sorry, I'm rambling.
Thank you very much, Maysoon, for the question. Maybe I will start with Gaza. I don't know what will happen, but what I was trying to say is that I'm thinking more about the experience of the Holocaust, and how actually the writer that I'm thinking about is Primo Levi, right? Who wrote about his experience in the extermination camp in literature. But his first book was, he wrote a report about how the Nazi organized the extermination of the Jews. And because the Soviets asked him to do that, because he was a scientist, right? But he chose literature to write about his pain. So really I'm thinking, and by the way, his novel was translated in the 80s in Hebrew. In Israel, because they didn't like this kind of, they wanted something more of a hero. It should be a hero in the camp, not someone who talks about the destruction of his community, but also how the human behave when you live this kind of terrible situations, right? So anyway, this is but so I don't know what will happen within the Gaza situation or the production, but something is clear is that I see on the Instagram and, you know, like poems, people writing testimonies, but like in very poetic way. And this helps them to leave all this horror that they're living right now. So I think this is what I'm saying. What this article, I wrote this article about Gaza because I was asked to write about Palestinian literature in general. And I said, I cannot write about Palestinian literature in general if I don't write about Gaza today. What I wrote first is about the writers and the poets and the, all these intellectuals who were killed. So I named them. So this is like, we are at this stage, like, but we should really follow. Something is clear is that we can connect literally with them today through Instagram and social media. So this was, I thought this is something interesting. I don't know how I cannot answer because you asked a previous question, how is this Palestinian literature taught somewhere in universities? I don't know, somewhere else, but obviously it is taught it should be taught in any department, like Emil Habibi, Mahmoud Darwish, who came from this region are taught. But like I can talk about myself, I teach in prison and I teach Palestinian literature in prison. And the poem of about Amira of Taha Muhammad Ali, I leave it to the end and we read it together. And this is what really touches people. And they at the beginning they will refuse to read, right? But and then they will start, and then we say at the end, wow, this is it, But it talks to them also as a prisoners being in the clause, You're right that you said that the names that I mentioned, some of them were exiled. I mean, Mahmoud Darwish and Rashid Hussein. Samira is not exiled. She's an immigrant in the United States. Riyad Baida still lives in the Galilee, etc. So literature. Why is literature their answer to inscribe the Nakba and their memory within literature was not so much as an answer to the Arab space, but to Israel, because at the same time, the Palestinians needed time to train new historian, etc. As soon as they had a new generation, they start talking about it and writing about it. So in some ways, there's this French historian here who worked a lot on the Algerian War. And then he started including within his work literature written about Algeria. Because most of the people do not talk about their experiences mainly in historical books, but in poetry, in novels, in theater. And today there are works that deals with this question, like about the theater. There's a work of Nakhla Serouti, who did a work about theater and the question of the Nakba, the question of the aesthetic of the theater, Palestinian theater today, done mainly by Palestinians in Israel. I don't know if he answered your question, but my main point is that for like Mahmoud Darwish, who knew that Mahmoud Darwish had an Israeli passport?
Yeah.
Right? Who knew that Emil Habibi? I mean, when I studied in Algeria, Habibi, we didn't know that, right? So this is what I'm saying, like there's kind of injustice to what, right? And thanks to them, actually, they gave the basis for what we call today Palestinian literature, which is good, right?
Thank you very much. That was really great. I think like your take on literature and how it makes it closer to the people, because it's like, lived experience and so on, brings me to a question to bridge, because I would like to ask you about, like, the rise of oral history with Rosemary Sayegh and others, and how that makes it more accessible and more touching when they started to talk about the lives of the Palestinian and the narration of their history of exiles, how they left, the whole story, and how much that debunked versus, just the historians or political scientists or the coiners of the Nakba, which were a bit of like trying to debunk, but there were no stories in that, which can link nicely, I think, to Sadia's point about literature and how it makes it more accessible and more touching. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think the goal is to figure out how to hold all of it softly and gently. I think if we think about the political economy, economic approach to history, or if we think of law, or we think of the everyday stories, it's how do we hold all of that together and attune to all of those. And I think the everyday experience, a farmer or just just an ordinary person, oral histories are so powerful. I think in a similar way that maybe literature is that it's a form in which like feelings and emotions and maybe more like honest truth can come through in terms of like a somatic experience. And I think memory, I think really is a big part of that. I think literature and oral histories offer a platform for memory that maybe like a political economy perspective of history doesn't hold memory as much, or as it's not a container for it. And I think it's so important to figure out, yeah, I think each of these thinkers that I wrote about, each offer tremendous, I mean, their knowledge production is tremendous, and there's a lot to be grateful for. And the oral histories really do, even in reading each of these pieces, I did feel most maybe emotionally moved by the pieces that were about ordinary people. And yeah, I think it's what is most conducive to honoring someone's memory. And I think maybe literature and oral histories might honor memory in more intimate ways than different approaches do. But I guess as a historian, it's trying to find ways that we can honor all these different approaches, and they each have gifts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have time. We have 3 speakers on. Yes, I want to ask if you would like to say yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mason. I just want to add one point about literature and culture in general. The role played just after the Nakba was important because it answers the amount of destruction that Israel did to the Palestinian culture, right? They stole the archives. They transformed the intellectuals into refugees, right? I'm thinking about the Stakakini, Baidas, and all this, they destroyed the newspapers. They destroyed everything. So they had to, in order to feel as a group, or keep wherever it was a group before, to rebuild it, So I think it was like kind of the answering this amount of massive destruction of the Palestinian culture in 1948. I have a question for Hadi.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. I just want to, before I ask my question, in France, the textbooks, I get frustrated myself with my kids because they study that. It's very short mention of the conflict, but France is hit by its history of the Algerian War. So they have this tendency to bring the equality between both sides, right? Let's not go further in it, but everybody was wrong, everybody was right, etc. There's this hypocritical aspect to avoid discussing the role of the colonial, the colonial powers within this question, Palestine, Algeria, and but the other challenge I think we have today is to find out how the Arab textbooks deal with this question. Because maybe it will answer why there is this big silence today about Gaza.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, I wanted to maybe you are working already on that, and would be interesting to hear your point of view.
Sadia, yes, in fact, my story of this thesis of also similar to what you see, in fact, because I went to Ireland to, in fact, conduct a different subject. And my initial subject, PhD, for PhD dissertation was about EU human rights policy to the Middle Eastern country, a comparative study chosen Iran and Israel and Saudi Arabia to compare how EU react to human rights violation in those countries. And when I was in the early stage of my PhD dissertation, so I needed to go to textbook, to dominant textbook, to popular textbook, to get some, to enrich my dissertation and to have some good knowledge about the question of Israel. And then in that stage, I realized, and this was a very important realization for me, that the textbook that I read, Western textbook, popular textbook, they are biased. And so they take the Israeli side. This was my, in fact, encounter with the Western textbook. So in that stage, I gradually came to the conclusion that this subject is more important than the initial one. So I changed my title to choose this title. But yes, textbook we have, of course, in the Middle East is very important. So I had an idea to conduct a research about Iranian textbook in school, of course, that how they treat Israel-Palestine question. And I think generally that our treatment of the question is poor. I haven't done, and of course, the detailed analysis of the question, but generally I can say, and with this so-called peace process in the Middle East, so we have reports in the news that textbook in Emirates, in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan, in different countries are changed when they, for example, try to, when they establish relations with Israel or try to get close to Israel. And this, of course, from my point of view, it's a disaster, because we in the Middle East, of course, we know what happened in Palestine, and because of, I don't know, balance of the power in the world of that kind of, we shouldn't sacrifice our knowledge for that political, of course, consideration. I don't know if I answered your question, but this is what I can say in this regard.
Thank you, Hadi. I think your question is very important, because Gaza is kind of created, like you said, there was a revolution in literature, but there is a rupture in geographies, right? So I'm not sure we can still talk about West and Arab states, because it seems like, you know, the most vibrant anti-war now is in the streets of the US and Europe. But at the same time also, that's why I think I asked Hadi about the political economy, because as of the 90s, there was a process in which all the curriculum change was overlooked by USAID and the World Bank, and there was so much money that was put into that. And so the history books and geography were changed. Previously, it used to be Arab-Israeli conflict. They erased all these from the books, but so there was, that is going on in the history books. And also, I also think because of the oppression and suppression that played a major factor in not allowing people to demonstrate. It doesn't mean that they don't support or they are not angry or all these things, but it is the production of ignorance in the Middle East now is very costly, and the Arab Gulf states are paying so much money for that. And this is something we really need to start to talk about, and basically also to escape identity politics and start to look at action, not values, and how they are produced. Thank you very much for the question. And then I think this can, the difference between the West, people coming to the universities in the West and the Middle East is because of the oral history and how, people learn about Palestine through oral histories and through other issues. Maybe, I'm not sure if you know, and if you want to say anything, Rich, as a, or no?
On what? On how?
Like it becomes, oral history becomes the substitute for what is lacking in the in what they are taught in schools and of course the resistant literature, right? So so this is the realm where these things take place.
I mean, yeah, as I grew up going to public education K through 12 in California, and there was maybe only issue, like I don't know of any the textbooks. There were issues for a billion reasons, including that. I mean, that was never discussed at all. It was like I just had to figure it out.
Thank you. And
Can I add one point to
yes, Hadi,
Sadia's?
and then Sadia, then Hadi. She held her hand before you.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sadia, please go ahead. Okay. No, just Sadia, about what you have asked about our textbook, I can remember now one subject that is related to that question. For example, in Iran, of course, the school textbook treat Israel-Palestine question and in different books. But now we can, in the university, that many students that are graduated from schools, they have very wrong ideas about the Palestinian, at least in one area. Many of them think that Palestinians sold their land to Jews, and then, for example, they regret and they became, I don't know, take another position. So this ignorance about how Arabs sold their land, how much and what happened in this area demonstrate clearly for me that really what textbook provide about this matter is not sufficient, is not clear to inform them about the reality of this question. Thank you.
Thank you. Sadia?
Yeah.
You're muted.
Microphone.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Yeah, no, I agree with you. Obviously, it's not sufficient, but I would like to react to point about the mobilization in Europe, at least, and the United States, but also the question of oral history. The kids, I would say the students and the youth who are being mobilized right now, a lot of them, at least, like if I talk about France, a lot of them, they have a colonial history. And they have a history as a marginalized group within the French society for being Black, Arab, but also if you add also to these groups, you have groups fighting for LGBT rights. This is an amazing thing in these demonstrations, actually, all these people coming together around the Palestinian flag that, would have not been used before. On the question of oral history, I would like to, this is really important. I see a parallel of the role of oral history for for the Palestinians and for the Jews and their tragedy and the destruction of the Jews, the European Jews, not by Palestinians, of course, but Europe. In a sense that the return of the survivals was a big problem. Even in Israel, they were treated like, you know, they were called savonim, they were called soap, right? And they were asked to forget Yiddish, and they, you know, it's after 67, especially after the Eichmann trial, that the question will become central, will be used. But at least from the people I talked to, from what I read, what kept their history is the fact that they mobilized the oral history and took the testimonies of the people who went through the horrible experience of the camps. So this is, I can see the parallel, even if the experiences are different trauma, but how they use similar method to include oral history.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yes. Yeah, I guess this is also a question of academia following how people start to, you know, it's always like some communities start to push back and then we follow, right? Most of the time, this is how it works. I think also what you mentioned about neutrality in textbook is now, like, you know, the whole production of the discourse of neutrality with universities, like we have to be neutral, and, you know, how can you be neutral with like non-neutral situations, to say the least. Okay. I'm not sure if you have anything else to say, and if not, would you like to say any final words? Or
Mason, in relation to what you have asked about the political economy of production of knowledge in U.S. University, of course, now I can remember that we can see that in universities that donors are very important in universities, and many of them are pro-Israeli Jews, and you can see now in relation to demonstration or relation with Israel that donors threaten universities easily, that if you, for example, take that step, as they call it, anti-Semitic step, so we withdraw from supporting that university. Of course, this should also work in relation to textbooks that universities adopt, and also in professors that universities use to teach history of the question. So universities should be aware of, sensitive of the donors and how they think about the situation. And of course, they don't risk losing that donations when it comes to sensitive issue like Israel-Palestine question.
thank you.
Or maybe if I might add also to your point about universities and what the question of Palestine and Gaza today is bringing is really further than the question of settler colonialism and genocide. It's what you raised as the donors for the universities. It raises a question of universal having access, right to education. And also the most terrible thing is the war and arms. You know, Gaza is kind of the testing field for the arm industry around the world. And and the youth today, they don't want to finish as soldiers and killing the neighbor, or, you know. So it's really the question of Palestine, and what's happening is bringing re-questioning the system, the world, and how do we want to live in this world. And, you know.
Yes. Okay. Bridge, would you like to say any final word?
Yeah, I just was going to add to that. I think what we see across university campuses and broader, it is like steadfast in our commitment to freedom across all, like Sadia mentioned, like there's like queer liberation tied into it. There's our steadfast commitment against anti-Semitism. There's like Black liberation. There's so many, there's questioning where military funding is coming from and transparency in that. And it's like, it's not just settler colonialism, the imperial projects do tie into all of this, but it's not just commitment against that. It is commitment across like a large, like the question, like the ruptures in this moment are so massive. And I think that, yeah, to pay attention to the ruptures across all of the systems in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is good to end with a hopeful note. And yes, there are so many ruptures. Hopefully the new generation of historian and textbook writers will be leading the way. And yes, it is a question, Palestine is a question of justice. It's not only a question of ethnic conflicts. So, and it is amazing how young people are and adults are like connecting all these struggles together, anti-arms, climate change, LGBTQ, and all sorts of justice in the movement now. I think also like to relate to the literature and oral history, thanks to the people's media that is bringing all these stories alive and defying the mainstream media and defying the political economy of media production about the question of Palestine. Thank you very much for great intervention and for lively discussion. Sorry, I maybe I talked a lot more than I should be talking, and I hope we can meet in other more hopeful time and more revolutionary knowledge production in all fields. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you. يعطيكم العافية. Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
It's been nice being with you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.